Well, it's been said that history may not repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. And surely history does matter, and especially today during a myriad of events that are happening around the world when we think of the United States as well as Canada. So, what are the lessons learned? Well, today we have a very ambitious agenda to talk not only about history but world current affairs. So, I decided what better person to talk to than my friend Conrad Black. Well, Conrad, you have certainly been a publisher with publications around the world. You've been a financier. You've also are a well-known author and a columnist. And you're also very much a historian. And so, I wanted to um, ask you to do us the favor by helping us to gain perspective from the sweeping arches of history, the lessons learned, and then talk about contemporary issues. So I'm really grateful to have you with us
Well,
today.
good to be with
And I also wanted to begin with, I think, really with a word of congratulations because we'll be talking about your recent book. It's part one of part three, and it's entitled "The Political and Strategic History of the World, Volume One." And it's from antiquity to the Caesars, namely 14 AD. And it's by the New English Review Press. And it's really a masterful piece. I had the pleasure of reading it. It's a mere 1,152 pages, as I recall.
you.
But it is a grand history, as you know so well. And so I just wanted to say congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much, David. And if you slogged through all of that, you are a great reader.
It truly was an enjoyable read. And it's interesting, we can see the story as you've outlined in this volume one here of history, the kind of elements, the foundational variables, if you will, that create enduring societies. I want to talk about what's happening in our continent now. We've got, and I need your help to help us understand what is going on here strategically. We have the United States, and there seems to be a significant reset that's going on, a restructuring, if you will, as the United States faces a massive deficit and debt. But it's also a geopolitical reset. We've got it. It almost is like a reset top to bottom as they talk about well, Greenland to Panama, to security issues related to Canada, as we're called out as being a NATO laggard. It seems to me that what the Trump administration is pursuing is, frankly, a restructuring domestically, but also a geopolitical reset around the world. It's interesting in the recent announcement that Donald Trump made, and I know that you know the president. He said, I am the president of the United States, not the world. So help us understand, Conrad, what is going on so we can better understand how we build our nation as well.
Yeah. Look, a couple of aspects, obviously, to this. The United States historically is not an imperialist country. It has never wanted anything other than to populate the area that it had and not to be threatened. And in the case of the United States, it has no geopolitical rival in this hemisphere, and it had no ambitions really in any other hemisphere. But when it felt threatened, it insisted on the removal of the threat. It would not. It didn't have the temperament or the need to go through century after century of intermittent war with other countries, the way the European powers did with each other. So now the threat is from China. Now, the Chinese are never going to surpass the U.S. You will remember 10 years ago, you couldn't set foot out of doors without somebody telling you that the Chinese economy was about to pass the Americans.
Mhm,
Well,
mhm,
today it's only 2/3 of the American economy, and it's not growing as quickly.
mhm.
China is no rival to the U.S. really, but it can produce a challenge. So, there, as we were discussing earlier, there's no challenge to Western Europe now. The
Mhm,
Western Europeans could certainly defend themselves against the Russians if there's any need for it. And
mhm,
in any case, the Americans are happy to maintain the alliance, but they're not happy to pay all the bills for the Europeans. But they're focusing on getting arrangements with Russia, India, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, and Australia, and other countries around China uh, in a containment, not military hostility, but a containment of China. Sensible strategic policy. So in that framework, they are revising the arrangements they had during the Cold War, in which they tolerated a very large trade deficit and the ability of a lot of countries to export into the United States. And then with the money they made doing that, because it's such an attractive place to invest, they would put it back into the United States. And the United States is such an economic powerhouse, they didn't have to worry about foreigners owning too much of America. And in any case, foreign trade is never more than about 20% of the U.S. economy. So, they could do this. But Trump has quite rightly said, we're not in the Cold War anymore, and we don't have to carry these people anymore. Now, I think what he's doing conceptually is correct. I think it's unnecessarily jarring the way he's doing it. But, he's the president, and, you and I aren't. His comments on Canada are nonsense, in my opinion. I don't blame him in one way for saying that Canada should be the 51st state. When Justin Trudeau told him our economy would collapse with 25% tariffs, he shouldn't have said that. It's not true, and he shouldn't have said it. And Trump already knew that Canada was not pulling its weight in defense spending, and it isn't. We just let the Americans essentially take care of our defense force, and no one attacks us anyway. So, I mean, superficially, he's right. And as far as Trump knows, most Canadians are practically impossible to distinguish from Americans from northern states. I mean, a guy from Winnipeg is hard to distinguish from a guy from Minneapolis or Seattle and Vancouver or something, other than the pronunciation of a few words. But he's missing something. Canadians are different. They don't like American crime rates. It's not a society that has a revolutionary tradition where there's a constitutional guarantee of the right to bear arms. It's a different stuff and a different spirit. But Trump never meant that, really. He didn't mean we're going to take you over. He just said, pull up your socks. We ought to be a serious country. You've got to behave like one, which there's something to that. But what it's in the context of the U.S. winding down Cold War arrangements that are now obsolete and unnecessary, and refocusing on a trans-Pacific challenge, much less serious than the Soviet Union, which was itself less serious than Nazi Germany. But it's still a threat, and Americans will not tolerate being threatened. And they won't just live with the threat the way the British had to live with the French and the Spanish, because they had no alternative. Because the U.S. do have an alternative. If someone challenges them, they can beat off the challenge and end the challenge, and not necessarily by military conquest. They never sought to conquer one square inch of Russia, but the communist state collapsed, and so that's what they're focusing on. It's focusing on the contemporary strategic problems and making rearrangements accordingly. Now, again, I think they could do it in a less abrasive way, but
Well, but it sounds to me, though,
the Americans are pretty civilized,
yeah. But within this, though, I think you've helpfully outlined that there's a larger strategic picture here. There's a geopolitical reset, if you will. There's a domestic reset as they look at their own financial situation, but also given the fact that they need to update these, well, Cold War arrangements that were made after World War II. And so we are where we are. So in this dynamic, rapidly changing environment, we know that on April 2nd, there was an announcement, a declaration of so-called economic independence. The president refers to it as Liberation Day, pardon me. And I wanted to play this brief clip by Donald Trump.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
So there you have the president in the Rose Garden with a myriad. I don't think I've seen so many American flags before, but there you have it, that kind of statement around Liberation Day. And it's fascinating, Conrad. Help us understand again, will these tariffs really force companies and allies, friends and foes alike, to drop protectionist trade barriers so that there can be we can pursue, well, reciprocity or free trade in this world?
I think it'll vary from country to country. Bear in mind, as I said earlier, trade exports and imports combined are never more than about 20% of the U.S. economy. So all this talk about prices skyrocketing in the United States are rubbish. Even if let's say it's 20% and 12% of that is imports and 8% is exports. For the 12%, let's say they uh, go up in price by half. That's
Mhm.
4% of the American economy. I mean that's not a huge increase in the price structure, the consumer price index or equivalents in more elective spending, and some of it you would recapture with better performance commercially by American companies. I mean, for example, if the price of a Mercedes Benz goes up by 25%, I don't know, I don't think that'll happen, but if it does, you'll sell more Cadillacs and Lincolns, and they'll raise their game. They'll produce better cars too. But
Mhm.
so almost half the people voted against Trump. So his his opponents will magnify the anticipated problem, and many people who voted for him, will be affected by the agitation that's gone on and be fearful that this could be a bad thing. But all of that is somewhat exaggerated. It won't be so bad now for them. Now for others, he has said we're ready to negotiate, and I think what you'll get is a reduction in the trade imbalance, and that's what he wants. I mean, look, in theory, there's always a balance because the money that goes out is replaced by money that comes in. I mean, Canada has
Mhm.
a problem because we're having a capital outflow that's gone on for 10 years, and it's causing us to lose our position in the table of the world's most prosperous countries per capita. But that's not happening to the U.S. I mean, they're getting richer every year, but his view
Mhm.
is that deficit was created in the Cold War for legitimate geopolitical reasons, but those reasons aren't there anymore, and it should be reduced. So he's doing his
Mhm.
customary shock and awe start to the thing, getting everyone's attention, but has said we will negotiate. And you will now get comprehensive trade negotiations going on with 40 or 50 countries at a time, proceeding better in some places than elsewhere, and new arrangements will gradually emerge.
Mhm.
And he said, we're not going to be unreasonable. We recognize our friends;
Mhm.
they're still our friends. He's saying the Australians are wonderful, but they're taking advantage of us. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, I personally think he could have handled it, as I said, in a less abrasive way. But he has his methods. He's a skillful
Mhm.
negotiator, as he was
But
in politics.
let's be clear here. We know we both observed trade negotiations for years. They can take years, if not
Look,
decades.
they're
So,
horribly complicated, and you can never have a sensible or even an interesting discussion in public about trade. I mean, I was at the Bilderberg meetings on the steering committee for 20 years, at the
mhm,
Trilateral Committee
right.
for 20 years. Trade was important. We would try and get people to talk about it in a way that was interesting.
Mhm.
Arthur Dunkel, for example, was the greatest trade expert in the English speaking world. And even Arthur couldn't make it interesting. You can start out with
Mhm.
concepts and quote Adam Smith and other economists and give interesting things, but then after 5 minutes, you're down to trading the
Mhm.
coating on
Mhm.
shingles against the
Mhm.
vanadization of titanium or something, and nobody knows anything about it. But yeah,
Yeah.
terribly important. But it's got to
Hmm.
be done by trade wonks. It can't be done, by
Hmm.
us or you
Hmm.
know, your average politician talking about it. I mean, they can talk about it, but it doesn't make sense and
Hmm.
doesn't mean anything.
Right. So the style is got to be understood that this is intentional to shake it up, so it doesn't
You
take
look
a
at
decade.
the precise, tangible results in dollars or whatever currency you're talking about, euros or whatever it is. You say, if you've got a deficit of such, then you want to address that. Now,
Hmm.
but by the way, I think Trump's comments on Canada are complete rubbish. He has no grievance with Canada. If you take
Hmm.
out energy, the U.S. does not have a deficit with Canada, and the energy, the largest element of it is oil they buy from us at a knockdown price and sell on at a profit to themselves. Well, if he wanted to
Indeed, and I
calculate
would
that,
argue that one of the points we should be making forcibly with the president is that if security matters to you as a nation, which we know it does, and if we think as a grand partnership on this continent, then energy needs to be foundational to the security for both of us. So let's work together, put that off to the side, and then you look at the real trade figures and you realize that, well, you know what? They actually have a trade surplus with this country. So that's the irony to this, isn't it?
now, they have a legitimate grievance on us freeloading in NATO. But in fairness, I think our political parties have acknowledged that, and I think
Mhm.
most Canadians don't want this country to be a freeloader, and they want
Exactly.
a better funded defense capability.
Indeed. Yeah.
So I don't think that's a contentious issue. But on the rest, I agree with you.
Mhm.
I think it'll be resolved quite simply. I mean, he's not Donald Trump is not hostile to Canada. He likes Canada.
Mhm. Mhm. But in this context, is it a fair comment that perhaps our elected elites of this country have really not gotten the point
Yeah, yeah. Well,
that
they
we
may be getting it now, but they haven't. They haven't.
well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think for years we've
Look, I think
downgraded.
Mulrooney did a good job for us with free trade, and I think Donald Trump acknowledges that. I mean, when I
Mhm.
asked him, I had a debate here in Toronto about a month before the U.S. election on the issue. The argument, the question was, would a Trump victory be a good thing for Canada? And on my side was Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey.
Oh, yes.
We were
Yes.
together. He was an enemy of Trump personally, but he was upholding the view that it would be good for Canada. And on the other
Mhm.
side were John Manley, the former finance minister, and Martha Hall Finlay, again a liberal
Mhm.
politician. Very nice people, friends of mine. A very convivial atmosphere between us. So quite an
Mhm.
enjoyable evening. But but we won, and I didn't think you could win a pro-Trump argument in Canada. But Chris and I, the governor and I, ex-governor, we won on the point that Trump would generate prosperity in the U.S. and Canada would benefit from that, given the
Interesting.
extent to which the economies are integrated. A rising prosperity in the U.S. is good for us. It means they buy more from us, so but I think it's. I think it's been overblown as an issue, partly because of Trump muddying the waters with this nonsense about the 51st state, and partly
Mhm.
because the liberals see it as the only way to get reelected, to pretend that
Mm.
Mark Carney is,
Mhm.
Churchill on the south shore of England, shaking his fist across the channel and saying, we'll fight in the trenches, we'll fight in the beaches and the hills and the streets and the
Yeah.
air and the sea, we'll never surrender. It was an absolute balderdash. No one's talking about
Okay.
things like that.
So we need to have rational heads here
Yeah, well,
and
yeah.
serve the interests
Well,
of
they're
Canada,
easy
because it's
elected.
interesting
That's what we need. Yeah.
when when you think of the rhetoric on both sides. I wanted to play a clip here, and this is, I know, a dynamic situation. We heard this week that that the government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, will be responding with a 25% tariff on automobiles that don't meet the current trade arrangements, and we'll see how this unfolds. But there's a clip by Mark Carney responding this past week that I found very curious as it talks about Canada's and the US relationship.
We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations.
So, what do you think about that kind of statement? Should we just give up on the U.S.?
No, of course not. No, I mean, Trump has said he'll negotiate, so we'll negotiate. But we have a good hand of cards to negotiate with. I mean, this isn't a poor country, you know. It's a skilled population and a treasure house of a country. We'll be fine. But look, in one level, I can't blame Carney. The only shot they've got for re-election is to pretend that they're, you know, that we're facing a mortal threat and they're better at defending against it. We aren't facing a
Mhm.
mortal threat, and I don't think they are better at defending against it. And that party got us into this box. I mean, if Justin hadn't sandbagged economic growth and had been a more reliable ally in NATO, none of this would be happening to us. But
Okay.
but with that said, Trump shouldn't have lumped us in with Mexico. I mean, Mexico is it's a wonderful country in some ways, but it's basically
Mhm.
a joint venture between gangsters and Marxists now, and they're in cahoots with China, trying to incite American manufacturers to build plants with subsidization from the Mexican government just inside the Mexican border, use cheap Mexican labor, fabricate Chinese imported parts, and then send
Yes.
it back
Yeah.
under the free trade agreement into the United States to generate unemployment in the USA. Well, the United States doesn't have to put up with that, but we don't do that.
Well, so the punchline here, Conrad, as we wrap up our conversation, is that this kind of challenge from the United States is really a challenge for a country to grow up, isn't
That's
it?
it. That's
To
exactly
get
what
back
it
to
is.
the
And
basics,
while
is
I'm
it?
not suggesting that Trump is doing this for this reason, he is in fact doing us a favor. But the answer to it is not Mark Carney's snideries calling Trump Orange Man and boasting that we have a wonderful healthcare system, which we don't. It's a shambles. I mean, at least 80% of Americans
Mhm.
have magnificent healthcare and no waiting lines. Now, they could
Mhm.
take better care of the other 20%, but that's their business, none of our business.
Mhm.
And you know, so yeah, it'll be fine. And of course, we should be more reliant. We got over 40 million people in this country now, David. We have more people than France had in the times of Victor Hugo and Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. We don't have cultural figures as distinguished as that, but we have the population, and we just got to pull up our socks. But you know,
Okay.
we get the government we deserve. This is a democracy, and if we elect a better government, we'll get a better country.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Conrad Black, for joining us for this
It's a pleasure.
long, far reaching conversation about history and the opportunities for Canada to, well, grow up and realize the potential of our nation as a free and prosperous country. So thank you so much, Conrad.
Not a bit. Thanks, David. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.